and child abuse he suffered probably played a significant role in his development, behavior, and psychological functioning. My Lord, I then go on in number 4 to again look at the literature regarding factors that may contribute to sexual offending. And I start off by saying, although the factors discussed in this section cannot necessarily be seen as direct causal factors for his offence, or take away his responsibility for the offence, it provides context as to the possible factors contributing towards committing the crime. So there's one crime that proposed a low self-control theory of, it's called a low self-control theory of crime, where sexual offending is expected when there's a motivation to seek sexual gratification, and when that is combined with a low self-control and obviously the opportunity, then that is how it can happen. Then studies have also found parental and birth factors that predicted the onset of sexual offending, specifically relating to young parent age. As I said, his mom was 15, parent violent offending history, and parent psychiatric history, which his mom also has. Another explanation of sexual offending against children is the abuse-abuser hypothesis, or you can call it the abuse cycle. So this hypothesis suggests that boys who have been sexually abused are relatively more likely to sexually offend later in life. Studies have gotten various different results, and the author here states that because of these two authors, because of that, sex offender treatment has long eschewed entertaining the offender's own history of childhood adversity for fear of excuse making. I go on to say, although having been sexually abused himself cannot be seen as a direct causal factor, there is the possibility that it could have played a role in his behavior. Then I look at the literature and studies that have made the link between alcohol abuse and sexual aggression, called the disinhibiting model. So according to this model, alcohol use results in applying more liberal norms when evaluating socially unacceptable behavior, such as a woman's refusal, etc. And the pharmacological effects of the alcohol include impairment in processing these inhibitory cues, and of course other cognitive functions such as judgment. The authors state that intoxicated individuals tend to concentrate on superficial salient cues such as feelings of sexual arousal rather than on the more distant covert cues such as victim empathy or a sense of morality. That is when they are intoxicated with alcohol. And I also look at the link that the studies have made between intoxication with drugs, and more specifically cat, and sexual offending. And I quote there from studies that says cannabis, cocaine, and amphetamine use is often thought to encourage sexual excitement. The effects of amphetamines have been found to increase libido and delay orgasm. In addition, amphetamine use is associated with sexual risk-taking. Another quote, methamphetamine users have reported increased sexual desire, and it may lead to both sexual arousal and aggression. So that it is hypothesized that being under the influence of these stimulants may lead to sexual offending. That's just one theory. Mr. Ninow said that he was under the influence of cat, and cat is considered an amphetamine-like agent. And he admitted that him and his ex-fiancée reported to me that when he uses cat, he becomes sexually aroused. I go on to talk about how himself, his grandmother, and his ex-fiancée have described him as being a completely different person when he's on drugs than when he's not. And then in 4.1.8, I say these factors that I've just discussed, namely parenting factors, his own sexual abuse history, and being intoxicated with alcohol and drugs at the time of committing the offence, cannot necessarily be seen as direct causal factors for the offence. But based on the above academic literature, it could potentially have played a role in his behaviour, and so those are risk factors that I will discuss below as well. Then I thought it important to discuss pedophilic disorder. So, my Lord, I start off by saying that the assumption is always that when somebody has sexually offended against a child, they would often be seen as, well, they must be a pedophile, because how can you otherwise explain such behavior? And I quote from one of the textbooks that says, public and media discussion of pedophilia and sexual offending shows a conflation of the two concepts, but this is not correct. A substantial number of identified sex offenders with child victims would not meet the classification criteria of pedophilia. So offenders against legal minors are sometimes inaccurately referred to as pedophiles when they don't meet the criteria. So pedophilia is a mental disorder, and it's classified as such in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 5th edition, which all psychologists and psychiatrists use in order to make diagnoses nationally and internationally. And according to the criteria, the first criteria is over a month or a period of at least 6 months. There's recurrent and intense sexually arousing fantasies or behaviors that include sexual activity with a prepubescent child. The second criteria is the individual has acted on these sexual urges, or the sexual urges has caused marked distress or interpersonal difficulty. And the third criteria is that the person is at least 60 years old and at least 5 years older than the victim. So if we look at criteria A, the sexual fantasies and behavior with children should be recurrent. Therefore, it should reflect, and again I quote, sustained, focused and intense pattern of sexual arousal to prepubescent children. Offenders diagnosed with pedophilic disorder frequently are characterized as non-violent and makes use of coercion tactics instead, and that's often referred to as grooming. So other child offenders, they do make use of violence, such as the case is now before the court, where he did use violence. Persons or people diagnosed with pedophilic disorder usually have long-standing exclusive preference for children, both as sexual partners and social companions, whereas other offenders turn to children as surrogates when adult partners are unavailable in times of stress. One of the authors of the textbook states that for him the key test of someone's sexual attraction is choice. In other words, if you ask the question, would the person choose a prepubescent or pubescent child if a sexually mature person was available? And taken from Mr. Ninow's history, he has chosen to have intimate relationships with adult women. Another factor that the DSM says it's not one of the criteria, but they say it's a good diagnostic indicator, it's something useful to look for, and that is the extensive use of pornography, depicting children, of course. And it explains to say that people will generally choose the pornography that corresponds with their sexual preference. And there's another study that found that child pornography is a valid diagnostic sign of pedophilia. Another thing that I just want to mention here in terms of differential diagnosis, so this is when you look at the DSM criteria, there are some mental disorders that have similar signs and symptoms, and you need to always exclude others before you can make a diagnosis. And in terms of the DSM, they list alcohol and substance use disorders. And then I quote from the DSM-5, the disinhibiting effects of intoxication may also increase the likelihood that a person who is primarily attracted to the mature physique will sexually approach a child. It's similar to what we said above, that offenders who normally would choose an adult, they tend to children as surrogates when adult partners are not available and in times of stress. So, as stated above, Mr. Ninow, as well as other collateral sources, denied that he's ever shown sexual interest in children or ever watched child pornography. He has committed a sexual offence against a child. Outside of that offence, there are no indications of sexual thoughts, fantasies, or urges towards prepubescent children. His behaviour can thus not be classified as a pattern or being recurrent, nor extending beyond the 6-month time period usually required for the diagnosis. So taking all of the above into consideration, my Lord, based on my interaction with him as well as collateral sources, as well as the psychological test that I will describe now, Mr. Ninow is not considered to have pedophilic disorder. However, the fact that he chose a child as his victim is cause for concern, and this aspect will have to be closely monitored in the future. I then sorry, my Lord, I can't hear. Yes. Yes. As I've explained here, using these diagnostic criteria that is internationally recognized, Mr. Ninow currently doesn't fit into this diagnostic criteria. And one of, besides the criteria that he does not meet to fulfill the diagnosis, one of the other diagnostic indicators is the use of child pornography. And I couldn't find evidence of him watching any child pornography. That's correct. So one of the explanations, I don't know. We don't know what went on in his mind, but one of the things that I mentioned here is that people with this disorder, they have a recurrent and long-standing pattern. Yeah. Yes. So as stated here, people with pedophilic disorder, a long-standing exclusive preference for children, both as sexual partners and social companions. And then on page 17, whereas other offenders, and that is the where I think Mr. Ninow is currently, other offenders turn to children as surrogates when adult partners are unavailable in times of stress. So that could be a motivation. So I then did a psychological test. It's basically a self-report measure, and it's designed to assist forensic specialists, mental health professionals in making assessments. It's not a diagnostic tool for sexual dysfunctions or sexual disorders, but it can help to identify potentially deviant sexual interests. In the introduction, I've mentioned that my opinion is not based solely on this test. I interpreted the information gained from this test in light of the clinical interview. And I quote here from literature saying a thorough clinical interview is a critical part of the assessment and the matter before the court. So this test basically has 4 scales, and I'm just going to name the scales, but it all has to do with finding out whether there are sexually deviant patterns or indicators. The first scale is called discordance, so that's the person's adjustment in regard to the sexual interests. Sexual obsession, obviously preoccupation with sex. Permissiveness, how liberal is the person's sexual values. Sexual stimulation, comfort of feelings regards to that. And then there's another 3 scales looking at sexual control difficulties. Sexual excitability, and on page 19, the last scale is sexual insecurity. So Mr. Ninow completed this test, and none of the scales were clinically significantly raised. So according to these test results, no atypical or disordered sexual behavior or paraphilic interests, such as pedophilia, are indicated. And as my Lord said, this is all in the past. And so then I do the risk assessment and looking at, from now onwards, because he has now abused, sexually, assaulted a child, raped a child. In this risk assessment, I just describe and say that it is more for when they are released, then it is valuable to have a risk assessment. We look at static and historical risk factors. Static factors are the factors that are historically present and we can't really change them. And that would be the fact that he was abused as a child, for instance. So we can't change that, but it remains to be a risk factor. And then dynamic risk factors are changeable factors that fluctuate over time. So for instance, expression of antisocial attitudes, or those, so at least in principle, those risk factors can be the target for treatment or supervision. My Lord, I'm just going to name the risk factors that I evaluated. So in terms of the first category I look at is sexual violence history. Chronicity of sexual violence is the first one, and it obviously indicates how often it's happened. So that factor is not indicated in this case. Diversity of sexual deviance on page 20. That looks at the multiple types of sexual violence perpetrated, and it's not indicated in his case. Escalation of sexual violence is obviously when the person starts to perpetrate, and the more he perpetrates, the more violence he uses. And this is not indicated in Mr. Ninow's case. Physical coercion in sexual violence. So this is actual attempted or threatened physical harm. And threatened physical harm is any act or utterance that causes or is likely to cause fear in the victim. So this risk factor is definitely indicated in Mr. Ninow's case because he physically coerced the victim by undressing her and raping her. Also threatened to kill her if she calls her mother. Then psychological coercion in sexual violence. So this referred to acts during the course of or to further the commission of sexual violence that involve threatened loss or promised gain of status, privilege, favor, and affection. Sexually grooming a child or abuse of power are examples of this. So this doesn't really look at, I know it says to further the crime, whereas the physical coercion aids in furthering the crime. The psychological coercion is more when they refer to sexually grooming a child, where they build a relationship with the child, and then they will cross the boundaries and they will start to assault. So in this case, abuse of power would be examples of people in church or a teacher who would use their status, again, to have a relationship with the child and then abuse the child. So psychological coercion is not indicated in this case. Then psychological adjustment is the next cluster of factors. The first one is extreme minimization or denial. So this refers to extreme minimization or denial, and it involves the failure to admit to or accept responsibility for acts of sexual violence and the consequences of those. It therefore means that the person denies having perpetrated sexual violence, he denies personal responsibility, and he denies that it has serious consequences. Although Mr. Ninow did not give a true version of the events in his plea, he has never denied that he committed the sexual offence, and the risk factor is therefore not indicated. Attitudes that support or condone sexual violence. So this would reflect what is the perpetrator's attitude and general view about sexual violence. Mr. Ninow, as well as collateral sources, denied that he condones sexual assault in general. Obviously, we're not talking about this being in general before the crime was committed. As described above, he reported that he has never been sexually violent with anybody, including his previous partners. His ex-fiancée confirmed this, and results from the Garrel's psychological test do not indicate that he supports or condones sexual assault. Because one of the scales there also look at what is your general attitude towards sexual behavior. So that risk factor is not indicated. Problems with self-awareness is the ability to self-reflect. And it could also be problems with a lack of appreciation of the factors and processes that place the person at risk. So self-awareness refers to having insight into one's own behavior. Mr. Ninow knows very well that, in his words, was he's trapped in the circle of abuse. He also knows and appreciates the seriousness of the offence he committed, as well as the consequences of his actions for himself as well as for his victim, as I will describe in point 7 below. So this risk factor is therefore not indicated. Problems with stress and coping. So that reflects the extent to which the person's psychosocial adjustment is unstable or susceptible to external effects. So related terms would be deficits in coping skills, maladaptive coping mechanisms, negative affectivity, and emotional self-regulation. Mr. Ninow has been dealing with his stress by abusing alcohol and drugs, which is a maladaptive coping mechanism. His emotional self-regulation may also pose a problem, as he has had anger and emotional outbursts since childhood, which in some cases have led to physical aggression. This risk factor of problems with stress and coping is therefore indicated in this matter. Problems resulting from child abuse, I think we've discussed that earlier, and he was a victim of neglect, physical, emotional, as well as sexual abuse, and this risk factor is therefore indicated. Then the next cluster of risks that we look at is mental disorder. anybody close to him. His tutor admitted that he sometimes had a short temper, but he's never seen him engage in physical aggression. So the risk factor for antisocial personality disorder is therefore not indicated. Major mental illness refers to substantial impairment of the person's cognition, affect, or behavior, or it can be referred to as psychiatric illness. Major mental illness may lead to impulsive or irrational decisions to act in a sexually violent manner. And then research indicates that the major mental illness, those that seriously impair cognition and affect, are associated with an increased risk of criminality and violence. As described above, Mr. Ninow was diagnosed with unspecified bipolar disorder with substance abuse at the age of 15 years old, and he was admitted to Denmark Psychiatric Hospital 3 times. So the risk for major mental illness is therefore indicated. Problems with substance use, so that includes use of illegal drugs as well as misuse of legal substances such as alcohol. Substance use problems may lead to impulsive and irrational decisions to act in a sexually violent manner. It is clear that Mr. Ninow is still addicted to drugs. As stated above, he has attended rehabilitation centers twice in the past but relapsed thereafter. The risk factor for problems with substance use is therefore indicated. Violent or suicidal ideation. So the risk factor reflects the experience or thoughts of harming oneself or others. The importance of suicidal ideation as a risk factor is that thoughts of harm may shift rapidly from self to others. As described above, Mr. Ninow has had suicide attempts previously when he was younger and is currently considered at risk for suicide. So the risk factor is therefore indicated. Social adjustment. So they'll be looking at problems with intimate relationships. Problems with intimate relationships involve failure to establish or maintain stable romantic or sexual relationships with age-appropriate partners. Mr. Ninow has never had difficulty with intimate relationships. He had 3 long-term intimate relationships which lasted between 2 and 3 years each. So this risk factor is thus not indicated. Problems with non-intimate relationships. This involves the failure to establish or maintain a positive social support network. Related terms are social alienation, loneliness, negative peer relationships, etc. Mr. Ninow stated that he's never really had long-term friends except his cousin, whom he was very close to. His grandmother stated that he had difficulty as a child to develop friendships due to his anger. He did develop a friendship with his tutor in grade 12, but they are no longer friends, and his ex-fiancée described his friends as druggies and bad news. He was referring to the people that he get drugs with. He never wanted to socialize with it. So this risk factor is indicated. Even though he did have non-intimate relationships, he doesn't seem to have close friends that are not using substances. Problems with employment, so this factor reflects a failure to establish and maintain stable employment. Although both Mr. Ninow and his ex-fiancée reported that he did very well in his role as a salesperson when he was sober, they also reported instability in his employment history, and that he was only employed for a few months at a time and he was resigned due to his drug addiction. So the risk factor for problems with employment is therefore indicated. Non-sexual criminality. So this refers to serious criminal conduct that is not sexual in nature. Serious in terms of this assessment means the criminal conduct was persistent, frequent, diverse, and involved severe potential harm to victims. The history of general criminality is a risk factor for violence and sexual violence. As stated above, before committing the current crime, Mr. Ninow had no criminal record, and therefore, although he engaged in criminal behaviour such as drug taking and stealing from his grandmother's house to support his drug addiction, as far as could be established, he doesn't have a history of serious criminal conduct. So risk factor is not indicated. Then the last cluster of factors we look at is manageability. And the first one is problems with planning. This factor reflects problems making and implementing pro-social life plans. Related terms are poor self-management, unrealistic goals, inability to delay gratification, and impulsivity. Mr. Ninow does not necessarily show problems with planning, but rather poor self-management and impulsivity, as seen with his drug use and emotional volatility, especially when intoxicated with alcohol, which would then derail any social life plan they may have had. The risk factor for problems with planning is therefore partly indicated. And the last risk factor is problems with treatment. And this reflects a failure to benefit from rehabilitative services designed to address the deficits that occurs in psychosocial adjustment. Examples are treatment rejection, non-compliance, or dropout. As described above, Mr. Ninow completed the 8-month rehabilitation program at Human Wings, as well as the program at Hartman House, as far as I can establish. So whilst he did complete the programs, he did relapse after both programs. He also defaults on his psychiatric medication when he uses drugs. So this risk factor is therefore indicated. Point 7, my lord, accused perspective on crime. Mr. Ninow has immense regret for what he's done. He feels extremely guilty and ashamed of himself. He admits that nothing can justify what he did. And I think I don't know if I need to go into detail about that. On the next page, when asked what effect he thinks the offence would have on his victim, he cried, saying, "She's going to hurt a lot, she will go through a lot, she might have problems trusting people again." He said, so all that he can relate to is his own experience. His grandmother also reported that he's extremely remorseful, and he also feels extreme regret and remorse towards his grandmother. Point 8, treatment. Cognitive behavioral therapy has now been generally accepted as the most effective approach to treating sexual offenders. And most importantly, that this therapy targets the dynamic risk factors, which I will summarize just now again, and focus on educating the client about risky situations and potential precursors for sexual offences against children, such as association with antisocial peers or drug abuse. The greatest factor in rehabilitation is, of course, the willingness of the accused to accept full responsibility for the crime and willingness to undergo treatment. Although there's no guarantee that treatment will be successful, the accused in this matter have accepted full responsibility for the crime and said he is willing to undergo treatment. Then, my lord, in summary, as stated above, Mr. Ninow's early parenting, so there I refer to those factors earlier, such as his parents' young age, the fact that they were drug addicts, the fact that his mother also has a psychiatric illness, witnessing the abuse of his mother. So those factors, plus his own abuse history, including alleged sexual abuse, and being intoxicated with alcohol and drugs at the time of committing the offence, cannot necessarily be seen as direct causal factors for his offence, but it could potentially have played a role in his behaviour when committing the crime. Based on the above risk assessment, the following static risk factors have been identified. That is his own child abuse, mental illness, and physical coercion. Mental illness can be a static and a dynamic risk factor because it was there before the crime, but it's still there and will still be there and will still need to manage after the crime. In terms of dynamic risk factors, the risk factors that I've identified is problems with substance use, problems with treatment adherence, mental illness, and that includes suicidal ideation, and then self-management, or rather problems with stress and coping. As I said, he uses drugs to cope or to escape his reality. And then there's partly problems with planning, there's more problems with impulsivity. And then there's also problems with non-intimate relationships as well as unstable employment. Multiple research of decades of sex offender recidivism research have shown two major risk factors related to sexual offences, which are, the first is deviant sexual interest, and the second one is antisocial personality disorder. These risk factors are psychologically meaningful because deviant sexual interest, and so there we talk about, for instance, a sexual interest in an inappropriate object or person such as a child. Because deviant sexual interest can be viewed as the motivations for committing the sexual offence, whereas having an antisocial personality disorder represents factors that facilitate on acting on those motivations. And as discussed earlier, antisocial personality disorder involves not having a conscience, not being able to empathize or put yourself in somebody else's shoes, repeated interaction or conflict with the law, etc. Mr. Ninow's drug addiction is probably the risk factor that is most concerning. It's imperative that he adheres to rehabilitative treatment for alcohol and drugs, and that he adheres to psychological and psychiatric treatment in order to better regulate his emotions. Based on the report writer's interactions with Mr. Ninow and clinical observations, he does appear to be sincerely remorseful and having insight into his actions and its consequences. A stabilizing factor in his life is the unwavering support of his grandmother. Unless Mr. Ninow adheres to rehabilitative treatment for alcohol and drugs, as well as psychological and psychiatric treatment, he is considered at risk to re-offend. My Lord, do you want me to read the recommendations as well? Okay, so the recommendations is that he requires drug rehabilitation treatment. He should see a psychiatrist for management of his psychiatric medication. He should also see a clinical psychologist for individual psychotherapy, as well as attend any group therapy or any programs that can aid in his psychological treatment.
I could then request that the CV be marked exhibit H and the report exhibit I. Along, but we're not supposed to use I or J.
No.
CV would be H and the report exhibit J. Then just want to clarify. Antisocial personality disorder in layman's terms.
So it also is referred to as psychopathy. So it is somebody who, like I said, on the one hand, has constant conflict with the law because they break rules, they have no respect for any laws, so they're often in conflict with the law. They also don't have any respect for others' rights, so they will violate other people's rights. And what makes them able to do that recurringly is the fact that they don't have any empathy with their victim.
In short, it's like
Yes.
But that is not.
No.
Thank you, Lord. After that, for the questions.
Thank you, madam. Your report stems back from the accused's childhood, correct?
Correct.
Highlighted the trauma that he suffered as a child, and as a result of that, then he also indicated to the court what might be the effect as he grows up. Is that correct?
Correct.
Ma'am, you said at the age of, he started staying with his grandmother at the age of 8 years.
That's correct.
And by that time, he was already sexually abused. He has already witnessed abuse.
That's correct.
And he was not yet on drugs and alcohol.
That's correct.
Now, he refers to his mother as his idol and a pillar of something. Grandmother is. At that age, do you agree with me that 8 years is still a tender age? And if given a support, love, and taken care of, were there any chances that he would, if he would turn out to be a different person to what he is today?
Just rephrase the question, please.
Look, he was abused.
Yes.
Then from the age of 4 up until, say, before 8 years old.
Before he lived with his grandmother.
Yes, before he lived with his grandmother. And the grandmother took him in, gave him love and support, and was always willing even to take him for rehabilitation to rehabilitation centers.
Correct.
Now, if he did not engage in drugs and alcohol, is it possible that he would have turned a different person as he is today?
I believe so, my lord.
And the trauma or the effect of abuse, trauma, and all the that he has suffered as a child will always show different to different people. Is that correct?
That's correct, my lord.
So a different person, say a child who has been abused, exposed to sexually abused and witness abuse, two different children, when they grow up, they may tend to be different people.
That's correct.
Others may be aggressive and others not.
That's correct.
Ma'am, this I'm saying because there were manner in which the accused testified and verbalized before this court that the grandmother was very supportive and was always the pillar of his strength. What do you think went wrong with him to turn up to be what he is today?
I think the influence of his mother was not good, because when he started visiting her is reportedly when he started using drugs. So although the grandmother did everything in her power to give him a stable childhood, when her daughter asked her, can Mr. Ninow please come and stay with me for the weekend, she allowed it.
Now, the fact that the accused was afforded opportunities, in his own evidence, he said 5 times he went to for treatment centers. Now, if he was willing to tell a different person, would that not have helped him?
My lord, it would. What he said to me was that he went to these rehabilitation centers because, like the first psychiatrist referred him there in her referral letter, and he did it to please his grandmother. As he stated this morning, he was for a long time in denial about his drug addiction. So what he's saying now is that he wasn't always as motivated when he was doing those programs.
And is he verbalizing to be motivated at the moment?
That's correct.
Could it be because he knows that in this case he's facing a possible life imprisonment?
No, I wouldn't know what his reasons would be.
But could that be possible? Look.
Sorry?
Is there a possibility?
It is a possibility.
Thank you. The reason why I'm asking this question is because you said people or pedophiles, not that, okay, you said pedophiles sometimes have a character to be able to be manipulated.
My lord, I said the antisocial personality disorder has that character trait of being manipulative.
Antisocial. And a person who is manipulative can never be always truthful. Is that correct? Because if you manipulate, you need to get a situation favorable to yourself.
That's correct.
So will you agree with me that such kind of a person may not always be truthful?
That's correct, my lord. But like I said, I don't think he has that characteristic. So I don't think that antisocial personality disorder is a risk factor in this case.
Ma'am, for you, you have assessed the accused and you have drafted up this report. How many times have you visited the accused in prison to see him?
3 times, my lord.
And for how long?
I can go to the beginning of my report, page 3, 1.4. Clinical interviews with the accused on, and then I give the date. So the first was 1 hour and 30 minutes. The second time I interviewed him was 2 hours and 30 minutes, and the third time was 2 hours.
So basically it was plus or minus 6 hours.
That's correct.
And you were able to extract information from his childhood up until now and be able to make those diagnoses that you have made.
That's correct.
In 6 hours.
Not just, because the 1.4 says sources used for the compilation of the report. So I used the information that I got from him, as well as the information I got from his grandmother and his ex-fiancée. I spent at least 2.5 hours with the ex-fiancée, at least 3 hours with the grandmother face-to-face. And of course all the documentation, the case docket, the affidavit from his custody matter, is where I got also a lot of information. The psychiatric report from West Copies, the healing wings, I received records from, I received copy of even his prescription for the medication from his psychiatrist. So there were multiple sources.
You received the record of the evidence.
Sorry, my lord, can
You
you?
received the record of evidence. Transcribed record.
Not printed, but
You don't know what is the evidence.
no, I know. I was sent the verdict, your verdict that you delivered.
So the judgment.
The judgment, yeah. So from
But you
the,
don't know the effect of it.
I know the facts of the matter. My Mr. Alberts, who instructed me, informed me.
And ma'am, you mentioned also that just a moment, my lord. Now, you mentioned that the accused seems to display behavior of difficulties in terms of anger, outburst, and occasional impulsive behavior.
Correct, Mama?
So his impulsive behavior, if you say occasional, it means it's controllable.
It means occasional, that it happens at times, and at other times it's not that impulsive.
And you further mentioned that the use of a drug has sexual stimulant that could cause a person to be sexually aroused.
That's what the literature says, my lord. The academic literature.
And you mentioned that a person who is in use of such a drug, when sexually aroused, may sometimes want to have or to relieve themselves, who would want to relieve themselves to an adult. If an adult is not available, then they may tend to a child as a surrogate, correct?
That's correct, my lord.
Now, there's evidence before this court that Mr. Ninow made utterances of willing or wishing to have sexual intercourse with a certain adult woman. And the fact that that woman was not available for him. In your opinion, is it possible that he had to relieve himself, opted to make this child, the victim in the case, as a sacrifice, a surrogate for the secure
That is possible, my lord.
desires? And the evidence says that is what points to the fact that that is what he did.
Let me understand how possible is that. Do you know? You said
So
you
I'm
don't know
just
the
saying
effect.
that obviously in his mind, in that moment, I don't know exactly what he was thinking. It's very possible that he was sexually aroused and there wasn't an adult there, so he turned to a child. I'm saying it's very possible.
Yeah, but you said you don't know the effect of this matter.
No,
This incident happened inside the toilet of the restaurant, where there were adults and young people.
I'm aware of that.
Yes. So where does your answer feature?
So I'm saying that it is very possible that that this explanation, that we can indeed apply it to what happened in this matter. So I'm saying that he was sexually aroused and there wasn't an adult available, so he turned to a child and raped the child.
But there were adult people around them.
Yeah, my lord, I can't say why exactly in that moment he decided to do that.
And also, you say, in the dynamics of sexual behavior of, say, a pedophile or a person that is in use of drugs, they may shift, the aggression may start, they may be self-infliction, they may be a danger to themselves, inflicting self-injuries to themselves, and it might progress to inflict injuries to others.
That's correct, Mama.
Now, ma'am, in this instance, there is evidence before this court that even when the accused was sexually aroused after he has used drugs, he would not force himself to his own fiancée. So now, in this instance, on the day in question, how do you make of that situation where now he was aroused and he prayed for the child and followed into the bathroom?
The same answers I've just given, that I think that he was sexually aroused. There wasn't a male person available, so he then decided to turn to a child.
And ma'am, the evidence before this court shows that he did not act impulsively. He actually planned. And do you agree with me that the fact that he made utterances to want to have sexual intercourse with a woman and then the child was turned to be a son, that is what he planned to have had sexual intercourse with a child?
That is the facts that the court found, that he planned it.
And you do agree with the facts and coupled with your investigation, is that correct?
When I spoke to Mr. Ninow, he maintains his version of the story, but I am working with what the court found, which is it was planned.
You see, ma'am, when you were called to compile the report, it was specifically a pre-sentence report. What did you understand by that?
I would like to refer to the, let me just get the page number. Page 2, introduction. Purpose of report. So I say there that Mr. Alberts asked me to do a pre-sentencing report. I then say Mr. Ninow was found guilty of rape of minor, possession of drugs, and defeating the ends of justice. Purpose of report. I quote from a guide to sentencing in South Africa. The main purpose of a pre-sentence report is to assist the presiding officer in gaining a better understanding of the offender and the reasons for his crime, be better informed about the character in the broader sense of the word, and the possible future of the offender. This is one of the triad of factors the court has to consider in sentencing. This triad is one of the general principles of sentencing and consists of three basic elements, namely the crime, the criminal, and the interest of society. And then a quote again from the sentencing book that says, assistance by experts in the field of human behavior can therefore be of much assistance in determining the effect this factor should have on the eventual
Yes, ma'am, I do understand that. That is a quotation of a book that you write. My question is, in your own words, what was the purpose of this report?
My Lord, the purpose of the report was to give a detailed history of the accused, and also to help the court to maybe understand factors that possibly influenced his behavior when he committed the crime, and then also looking at the future of the offender and what risk he poses currently.
Is it not the people of the pre-sentence report to assist the court in coming to an appropriate sentence?
My Lord, I can't hear.
Is
Sorry.
it not the people of the pre-sentence report to assist a court to come to an appropriate sentence?
Yes, but only with this one element of the triad, namely the criminal. The court has to take into consideration the interests of society and various other things. So it's not my role to propose a specific sentence. I am here to give the court insight into the history and the behavior and the possible future of the criminal, which the court can then use to do a sentence.
Now, in other words, your report sketch as to what may have caused him to commit the offense, or how he committed the offense?
Yes, so the factors that I describe under point 3 and point 4. I would like to just read from my report on page 15. That would be the summary or conclusion of those two parts of the report. These factors, namely parenting factors, I mentioned them earlier, but I can mention them again.
You say page 15?
15, right at the bottom, 4.1.8. So these factors, namely parenting factors, his own sexual abuse history, and being intoxicated with alcohol and drugs at the time of committing the offense, cannot necessarily be seen as direct causal factors. So I'm not saying that he committed this crime because he was intoxicated or because he was abused as a child. I'm just saying it's factors in his life that might have played a role in understanding his behavior. So I go on to say, but based on the above academic literature, could potentially have played a role in his behavior, and it could be risk factors for the future.
Now, you mentioned that you correctly say that these factors, they are not the cause, or they are not the direct causal factors to the offense.
That's correct.
Now, the accused in his own testimony, he mentioned that he does not care anymore, nothing matters anymore, he's full of anger, and as you agreed earlier on, that the degree of infliction of injury may always increase from oneself to another. Taking into consideration that he was also taken for rehabilitation to rehabilitation centers 5 times, and at one instance he was expelled before at Elma. He was expelled because he continued to use the drugs.
That's correct.
All those factors taken together, wouldn't you say the accused is a danger to the community?
I'd like to refer to my summary on page 27. In fact, page 28.
Page 28.
9.9.
Yes.
Unless Mr. Ninow adheres to rehabilitative treatment for alcohol and drugs, as well as psychological and psychiatric treatment, he is considered at risk to reoffend.
And the fact that he was at a rehabilitation center 5 times already, and at one stage he was expelled, and at all times he was using drugs, and in his own evidence today here, he said he's still using drugs in prison.
That's correct, my lord.
Do you agree that he is a danger to the community?
I believe he's a danger if he does not adhere to his psychiatric treatment and drug rehabilitation. I think once those factors are managed, the risk would become lower.
But will they be manageable if the offender, in the form of the accused, is unwilling to cooperate or to accept that he's got a problem? And
so if he's still denying that he has a problem and doesn't want to accept treatment,
or the persistent use of drugs?
Yeah, so if he is not willing to undergo treatment, then it wouldn't be possible to rehabilitate him. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No, he has been to a rehabilitation center 5 times already, and he has seen different kind of professionals.
Yes.
You can try and assist him.
Yeah.
And always, even in the rehabilitation centers, he would continue to take drugs.
Yes.
Would that not make him a risk to the community?
I believe that if he does not adhere to the treatment for
Means he has already
so if we
taken
yeah.
drugs and he did not adhere to the processes, will you still say he is safe to be out there in the community? Or
I don't think it's my place to make that decision.
Yeah, but you're an expert. You can't say it's not your place. You're an expert. Why are you calling? You're called here to assist them.
So I think that he is at a higher risk to reoffend if he continues his drug use and he doesn't adhere to psychiatric medication. If those factors are under control, I think he is a lower risk for society to reoffend, to sexually reoffend.
ma'am, you say it is not in your place to say whether he is a risk to the community. Is it in your place to say he may not re-offend or he may not reuse the drugs if given a chance? Taking into consideration the chances that he was afforded going to the rehabilitation centers.
So we've got a history that he has relapsed every time, and that's why I've indicated it as a risk factor, treatment adherence. Going forward, and as I said earlier, we can only go on what the accused tell us, and he told me that all the previous times he wasn't really motivated. He says he's motivated now. Whether he's going to adhere to treatment, we don't know. We have the history of him completing programs though. He hasn't dropped out, but he has relapsed every time. So in terms of the history, I mean, I think, in general, drug addiction is a lifelong thing that is difficult to be rehabilitated from. But that's going to depend on himself.
Ma'am, even after he has verbalized that he intends to change, he is in prison. Today, he mentioned that he has taken drugs in prison, right in prison, more than 20
He told
times.
me as well.
Would you say he's a person who's who can possibly rehabilitate?
I think
Despite him verbalizing that he is ready to change, yet he takes drugs still.
I think it is possible for him to rehabilitate, but I agree with you, those factors is negative factors. The fact that he's still
Those factors, if I may put it, do I understand you correctly that those factors makes him a risk to the community?
There is the possibility that he will reoffend, yes.
And that will make him a risk to the community.
That's correct, my lord.
Ma'am, you are in a private practice, correct?
Correct?
And you came at a fee. At a fee.
I don't know the available.
As a, I will withdraw.
Are you saying she's the highest cut?
As the court pleases, madam.
We are no longer an expert. We have to be neutral. I think that's what she's trying to say to you. You understand?
Yeah.
Yes.
As a court pleases. And ma'am, the evidence before this court clearly indicate that the accused planned on that day. He preyed on the child, attacked her, and raped.
Correct, my lord?
And I further put it to you, finally, that there is no way that the accused can rehabilitate, taking into consideration that he's been given a chance, he's been to rehabilitation centers before, and he did not consider telling a new leaf.
My lord, I can't agree with the words, there's no way, because we can't say that. There is a possibility that he will be rehabilitated.
Yeah, but based on the fact that he has been to the rehabilitation center in the past, and then they didn't work.
Yes, and
what are the chances now?
Yeah, so I suppose the chances, it'll be hard to put a percentage to that, because what is also saying
but
to us,
you have to summarize. What can you say?
what is also saying to us is that previously he wasn't motivated, now he is motivated. So there is a chance that he will adhere to his treatment, but we've seen a history of non-adherence. So,
But he's going to kill himself if he gets less sentence.
sorry, the question is?
He says he's going to kill
Yes.
himself if he gets what is the motivation?
He said that the motivation is just self-hate and for having committed this offense.
And ma'am, could it be possible that the accused, knowing that you are preparing a report for pre-sentence, he could have manipulated your processes to give an outcome that, in your opinion, will make you believe that he still can change, given a chance?
My lord, I'm not here for the accused. I'm not here for any party. I think I've done enough of these kinds of assessments, worked with enough offenders to not be manipulated, and therefore I based my opinion on my interaction with him, but as well as other multiple sources, interviews, documentation, etc. So I believe my opinion is neutral.
Ma'am, maybe you did not understand my question correctly. I'm saying, given the fact that you have mentioned that people who are on drugs, they have a character that they are able to manipulate situations to get them favorable on their side. Then the question is it possible or is it not possible that, knowing that this is a pre-sentence report, he could have manipulated your processes in order for you at the end to make an opinion, formulated an opinion that he is
My lord, I said that being manipulative is a character trait of antisocial personality disorder, and I don't think that risk is not indicated in this matter. So, and I refer to my previous answer in terms of I think that I, compiled the report from multiple resources, and I have experience in doing so. So I believe that my report is neutral, objective, and I hope it will assist the court.
I'm with you on that. But now, the accused mentioned that at some stage he requested his grandma to book him off so that he may be away from people. How would you classify that character?
I think that is part of his depressive symptoms of hating himself and the rest of the world, and not wanting, because like I said, his main coping mechanism is the use of drugs when in stressful situations. So he's learned that as a child to always turn to drugs, which is also a way of escaping. So I would say that saying that he wanted to go away would be avoiding his own problems by going to the psychiatric, just as he avoids his problems by drug use.
Antisocial disorder would it not fit in that kind of...
No, my lord.
Thank you, Ronald. I have a few aspects. You were asked about the fact that accused from the age of 8 years old was living in a caring surroundings with his grandmother. Would that mean that everything else that happened before with him would just be disregarded and erased?
I think that if his grandmother wasn't there to take care of him and he didn't have that stable relationship, that he probably wouldn't have completed school, did well at school, etc. She's like a protecting, stabilizing factor in his life. So, am I answering your question? So,
would that mean that everything that happened before that doesn't?
No, of course not. The first 7 years of your life is quite important in terms of growth and development as a child.
Understandably, correctly, the mother, although the grandmother was now in control, the mother kept on having some interaction with him.
That's correct, Mom.
Some mind involvement and stuff.
Yes.
I just want to thank you took paragraph of page 18 of your report, the heterosexual behavior scale. But it was just, there were questions regarding the possibility of you being played. Could you just explain to us what the scaling is and whether there are any or the test?
Do you want to repeat the evidence?
My Lord, that aspect was specific. Why I should ask this, because this is something that was not mentioned.
Did that question come out of cross-examination?
My Lord, the question in cross-examination was whether the accused could manipulate. And I just want to highlight something in the report that wasn't specifically mentioned, and that is as far as the validity scale of that heterosexual behavior.
Then go to the relevant part.
5.2.2. 2.2.
Yes.
So the response validity pertain to instances where the examinee's responses is not necessarily correct, and that could be just because their focus was elsewhere and they didn't, or he may have been trying to project a false image to the examiner. For this reason, the test contains validity scale, namely the inconsistent responding index. There are 16 pairs of items that are usually given similar ratings, and when 8 or more of these pairs are inconsistent, then you cannot interpret the score of the test. You cannot assume that the protocol is valid. Mr. Ninow's score on on that scale was 5, and his test protocol can thus be considered valid.
Is it possible for you to say whether he's going to rehabilitate or reoffend? Is it possible for you to say?
He may reoffend, especially if he doesn't adhere to drug rehabilitation and psychiatric treatment. Then he's at a higher risk.
Maybe I should ask the question this way. What can you do in helping the court to decide whether there is a risk of reoffending? What have you done in this report?
So there is the chance that the offender will re-offend.
Your expertise, if I can put it that way, employed in compiling the report. What can you do to guess whether he could reoffend or not?
My Lord, I refer to page 28 of my report, where I mentioned that I've looked at all these different risk factors, and that literature tells us that, I'm just going to read, multiple reviews of decades of sex offender recidivism research has shown 2 major risk factors related to sexual offences, which are, the one is deviant sexual interest, and the other one is antisocial personality disorder. Mr. Ninow doesn't have either of these risk factors. So the chance of him, I mean, I've worked with people who they deny what they've done, they still rationalize that it wasn't that bad, etc. So from a point of view that he doesn't have a sexual interest in children, not at this stage, I can't find evidence of it, and the fact that he is not an antisocial person, therefore would increase the possibility that he will be rehabilitated and that he wouldn't re-offend.
Thank you, Lord. After the questions.
I understand your report to say that the accused doesn't have any mental illness.
No, he does have bipolar disorder.
Then let's go to page 28 of your report.
28.
Item 9.7. You are saying that the accused is sincerely remorseful. Why are you saying that?
I'm saying that based on my interactions with him on the 3 different occasions, my clinical impressions.
Yeah, but what informs you to come to your conclusion?
Because again, like I say, I've worked with other sexual offenders who will deny that what they've done, or they would minimize it. Now, extreme minimization is one of the risk factors. So they would say it wasn't that bad. She didn't have physical injuries, etc. So they would not take responsibility for what they did. And so therefore their chances of rehabilitation is almost none, because in their mind they believe, they rationalize what they did is okay with this child, because they would say, I have a relationship with her, we love each other, etc. Whereas this offender does admit to the fact that he did it, and that he knows it was wrong, and the fact that he has insight into the possible the consequences for the victim. When I specifically asked him that on 2 occasions, that he has insight into the fact that the suffering of the victim.
Now, can you draw a line between regret and remorse? Can you draw a line between regret and remorse?
Yeah, so regret would be if you just regret something And normally that would be because you are facing a life sentence, and so you regret what you've done. Whereas remorse is a true feeling of having empathy with your victim.
Yeah, but for the fact that the person admitted to the commission of an offense, does it indicate that it's remorseful?
The fact that no, I based that on my interactions with him when he told me that he is remorseful and he regrets having done that. And so under point number 7, he said she didn't deserve that, she did nothing. And he admits that nothing can justify what I did to her.
But can a person said to be remorseful when he puts blame on other aspects? For example, when he came and testified, he said if he was sober, he couldn't have done that. It is because of drugs and alcohol that he did whatever it was done to the victim in this.
Yeah, so I don't share that view. I don't think.
Yeah, but you still insist that the person is remorseful.
Yes, according to my interactions with him, I think he is remorseful.
No. Based on the evidence, on his evidence in this court. I'm not talking about the initial chain. I'm summarizing his evidence for you because you are not there. He said no, if he was sober, he couldn't have done that because of drugs and alcohol. So I'm asking, is it an indication of a remorseful person?
I think that he maybe doesn't understand the...
No, I'm asking you. I'm not asking that.
I still maintain that he is remorseful, sincerely remorseful.
Any question around
Nothing.
Nothing, thank you. Thanks very much for your time. Yes.
Well, the next witness would be the probation officer, Ms. Gelder. My Lord, again, I've got a copy of the report. But I didn't quite indicate that she would have questions to the witness, so I was careful to just give the report to the court before testifying. I expect that I might have miscalculated, but it's not disregarding the court.
State your full names and surname for the record.
Dieter Kelder.
Do you have any objection to?
Dieter Kelder.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you swear that the evidence about to give will be the truth, nothing but the truth? If so, raise up your right hand and say so shall it go.
So help me God.
Yes.
May take a seat.
Thank you. You are social work employed with the Gauteng Province Department of Social Development.
That's correct, my Lord.
And can you just place your qualifications on the record?
I have a degree in social work. I obtained it from the University of Pretoria
When was that?
last year.
Can you please raise up your voice?
Excuse me, sorry. Last year, my Lord.
Yes.
You were requested to file a report 3 cents before the accused of this matter. Is that correct?
That's correct, my Lord.
Would you mind taking us through your report? It's not necessary to read verbatim, but just take us through your report. Please commentary.
Okay, I started with the background of the accused. Excuse me. I started with the accused version of the offence. He stated that he was on a 3-day drug binge, and as he was continuing with his drug use, he became increasingly deliberate and willful. He also recalls a time when he went to Arcade Empire, where he left without paying. And on the day of the incident, he wanted to go to work, because he was absent the previous few days, but he decided to avoid the manager and went to his dealer instead to get some cat. On his way home, the accused stopped at the Dross restaurant because he had to think of what to say to his girlfriend because he was not going to work.
Can I just ask, don't continue rapid trials of...
Then when he got to the restaurant, he had no plan, he says. He only sat down and drank some alcohol. And then he says the place was full of black people, so when he noticed the white person, he approached him thinking he knew him. But then he realized he does not know him, but he continued to approach him and he engaged in conversation with him. Then they shared some drinks and he talked, and he states that he could have made inappropriate comments, but he cannot recall what they were. And then he says he constantly went to the bathroom to use drugs. And then later the manager joined in the conversation. But then the accused went again to the toilets, but this time to the female bathroom. And he entered the first cubicle, but the door could not lock. And then the girl came in, saying she wanted to wee, and he pulled her inside. And then I quote, he said, "My mind was very evil," and he was in another state of mind, and it was never my intention to hurt her. And then the accused say, "I must have lifted her up on the toilet and pulled her down her tights, and then I had messed up thoughts." And then the accused put his fingers in her vagina and realized it was wrong. And then I tried to put my penis in her mouth, and I was busy crying when the mom entered. And then people started pushing on the door, and I pushed back, and the door opened, and the accused ran off to the male toilets. And then he states that he cannot recall exact details of the incident. He has fragmented memories and only remembers sensitive parts. And then previous convictions, he has no previous convictions. Then I just did a genogram of his family background. Family background I obtained from the accused and also from his grandmother. The accused is 21 years old and the only child of his parents. His mother was 15 years when she gave birth to him. He never knew his biological father. The accused's mother was also addicted to drugs. After birth, the accused and his mother stayed with his maternal grandparents. Then the mother of the accused began a relationship with a man, and they moved in together when the accused was approximately 18 months old. Per the maternal grandmother, the relationship between his mother and the boyfriend was physically abusive, and the relationship ended, and they moved back to his maternal grandparents. And then later the mother entered into another relationship, a man described as a drug dealer and addict by the grandmother. The accused and his mother moved out of his grandparents' house yet again and into the house with the other boyfriend. And then his maternal grandmother states that there were many instances of physical abuse and drug use. And so the maternal grandmother wanted to protect him as far as possible. And she recalled an incident where the accused visited her and he was full of injuries on his back, bottoms and legs, and a knob on the back of the head. And the accused then said he was thrown against the basin in the bathroom. And the accused also recalls incidents of abuse and when he was locked inside closets. And then the grandmother describes the accused at that time as a wild child, undisciplined and very much beaten. And on one occasion when the accused was 4 years old, the grandmother asked the accused how his parents were feeling, and he said mommy was cross and daddy was happy. And daddy was happy because he used baby powder in the nose. Then he demonstrated the use of baby powder, and that's when his maternal grandmother realized that they were using drugs in front of the accused. And the accused was allegedly sexually abused by a family friend when he was 4, and also another time when he was 8 years old. The accused denied any wrongdoing at that time and never made a disclosure, and no charges were made against the perpetrator. Only later did the accused disclose when he was a teenager. The accused parents were evicted from their home, and the accused again returned to his grandparents' home. And at that time, his maternal grandmother wanted custody over the accused, and a high court then ordered the grandparents' custody. Eventually, the relationship with the accused's mother and her boyfriend also ended, and she moved back to the grandmother. But then she moved out again into another physically abusive relationship, something the accused witnessed. And when the accused was 12 years old, his mother introduced him to cats. And his grandmother says that this was the end of the road for Nicholas, and described that drugs is a normal way of life for him, and he grew up with it. He had a battle with drugs his whole life, and the first 7 years of his life was absolutely horrendous. And then the accused was in psychiatric hospitals and rehabilitation centers from onwards. And yes, his maternal grandfather passed away, someone the accused regarded as a father figure, saying he was my father, he was my dad. And the accused has a 10-month-old son. Then I continue with employment history. He's currently unemployed. He worked in Vodacom for You. He resigned because he said drug use interfered with his work. He worked in Colorado Vodacom for a week before he resigned, and in Woodlands he was employed, but just one day did not show up for work. Interpersonal relationships. The accused has a close relationship with his maternal grandmother. He describes her as the most loving and caring human being alive. She's my idol. He feels tremendous guilt towards his grandmother for everything he put her through, saying, I owe her big time, I will make it up to her. She will be proud of me one day. The grandmother visits him every Tuesday and Thursday. And with his mother, he regards her as an older sister. She introduced him to drugs, and the accused feels he only gained acceptance from his mother when he would use with her. He also resents his mother that she was not there for his grandmother, and that she continuously broke down what she, the grandmother, tried to build up. The accused was in a 3-year-long relationship with his ex-fiancée. She can almost say nothing bad about the relationship, except that drugs and alcohol eventually ruined the relationship. She also says that the accused did everything for her and spoiled her, and the first year was almost like a fairy tale. Eventually, drugs and alcohol took over his life and changed him into a person that she does not want to know. Physical health, he has no physical problems. Psychological health, the accused had several suicide attempts. His first attempt happened when he was 13 or 14 years old. He was then admitted to Denmark Psychiatric Hospital, where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He was put on medication, and per his grandmother, he was doing well on the medication. The accused then explained that he did not adhere to the prescription medication because it made him numb emotionally, and he could not feel anything. The accused was then admitted to Denmark again following another suicide attempt when he was 17 years old. And there was a third suicide attempt, but his grandmother cannot recall exactly when that occurred. And he was yet again admitted to Denmark. And then the Biskop's Hospital psychiatric report also say that he is diagnosed with mixed substance abuse. He admits to using cat, crystal, meth and dacha, but also admitted to Dr. Lukosi that he uses cocaine. And then he admitted to using drugs and alcohol still in prison. And the accused is not being currently treated for bipolar disorder. Previous treatment or intervention, he was admitted to Denmark on 3 occasions. I could not confirm the admission dates. The accused and his grandmother states that the accused was banned from Denmark Psychiatric Hospital due to illicit drug use. The accused was also a patient at Healing Wings Rehabilitation Center, and he was admitted there from March to November. The accused was also in Houghton House for a period of 30 days, but this information could not be corroborated. Impact of the offence, okay, this was not in my mandate to do a victim impact. However, there are extensive research saying the long-term impact of abuse includes affective disorders, suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, attention deficit disorder, conduct disorder, intergenerational effects, increased re-victimization, affective instability, abuse of self, and substance abuse. And women with a history of child sexual abuse have a high rate of alcohol dependence and an overall increase in addiction to tobacco and illicit substances. Okay, my evaluation. I looked at the attachment theory. Security and attachment stems from early experiences with affectionate parents that promote attachment behavior of being responsive, available and comforting when a threat of stress presents itself. And a body of evidence suggests that maternal substance misuse is associated with maternal psychopathology, which may impair a mother's competence in providing proper care and discipline to a child. And then there's a concern for lack of secure attachment for the accused. The accused's mother drug use while the accused was in a care could have impaired her competence to provide adequate care and discipline to the accused. Hindering the formation of a secure attachment. And further evidence of a lack of secure attachment were from his unmet emotional needs, where he experienced little love and affection, as he states that his mother blames him for a lot of things and acceptance he never received. And the accused's need of security was also not met when he was frequently in and out of grandmother's house. And there was no stable father figure and no predictability. And the need for responsibility was also not unlikely met, as he was introduced to drugs by his mother. Early attachment experience of insecure persons are characterized by rejecting or inconsistent parenting, which may hamper the development of inner resources necessary for successful coping with life stresses. Insecure attachment has been found to be associated with depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and substance abuse, as well as behavioral problems, including aggression, antisocial behavior, and conduct disorder. Insecure attachment is associated with dysfunctional attitudes, which predict lower self-esteem and higher depressive symptoms. Various literature shows key variable identified in the development of individual characteristics of any criminal propensity. It is the role played by parents in terms of factors such as attachment, child rearing practices, neglect, abuse, supervision, and parents' criminal behavior. Okay, and then poly-victimization is defined as an experience of multiple forms of trauma Children can be exposed to various adversities, including property victimization, assault and bullying, sexual victimization, witnessing and exposure to violence, and maltreatment. The accused was exposed to property victimization when his childhood home was raided for debt owed to drug dealers. The accused was a victim of physical and sexual abuse. He witnessed violence and aggression towards his mother and suffered maltreatment in terms of psychological abuse and bullying. Poly-victimized children are at risk of several difficulties during childhood years, with a wide array of internalizing and externalizing behavior. They show an increased risk of substance abuse, mental health difficulties, and social struggles. The accused shows various internalizing behavior with known depressions and feelings of not being good enough, being a disappointment, and full of shame. And using drugs help avoid these feelings and gives him confidence in himself. And he has also a lot of externalizing behavior in terms of aggression, impulsivity, and defiance. And the accused admits that drug use only enhanced this behavior. And then the accused's lack of secure attachment together with polyvictimization exacerbate these feelings of depression, inadequacy, disappointment, and guilt. The accused's drug use was a way of avoiding these feelings. So a way of coping and a coping mechanism. And then I went on to remorse. They say identifying remorse is highly subjective, and lack of remorse often correlates with other character traits, attitudes, or demeanor. For example, lack of respect, hostility, aggressiveness, lack of interest or caring, previous convictions, and how the defendants live their life. The accused displays none of these character traits. The accused was respectful and forthcoming to the probation officer. The accused was very cooperative and displayed considerable concern and empathy for his grandmother, the victim, and her family. And based on this correlation, I'm of the opinion that the accused is sincere in his remorse. And then when I considered sentencing, I considered the triad of sin, looking at the seriousness of the offence, interest of society, personal circumstances of the offender. Looking at the seriousness of the offence, I considered the victim, the motive, and the intent. The victim is a 7-year-old girl. The state proved intent by proving the accused followed the girl into the toilet. The accused also tried to get rid of evidence by trying to flush the victim's panties down the toilet. There are no mitigating factors in this leg of triad. In the interest of society, I looked at the prevalence of crime against women and children and the defenselessness of the victim. The victim was defenseless and overpowered by the accused. She could not call for help, and the accused prevented people from coming to her aid by pushing back on the door. Crime against women and children is especially high, and it may be in the interest of society to deter other potential offenders by handing a harsh sentence. There are no mitigating factors in this leg of the triad. The last leg of the triad consists of personal characteristics of the accused. The probation officer considered the previous trauma of the accused and has empathy for the accused. However, the accused acted impulsively and traumatized an innocent girl, continuing the cycle of trauma. Mitigating factors could be that the accused is a first offender. He was heavily intoxicated at the time of the offence. There was lack of planning. The accused shows remorse. He pleaded guilty. And he has a dependent child. And then I'm also concerned for the accused's continued drug use. And also I looked at punishment as purposeful deterrence, rehabilitation, protection and retribution. And should I read the recommendation as well?
Yes, yes,
I recommend that the accused be handed down a life imprisonment sentence for both acts of rape of a minor. And then there's just a revision clause that I can amend my recommendation should new information. A revision clause, I should amend my recommendation if I have new information.
Can you,
I'm sorry.
can you just repeat your...
Okay, my last bit is a revision clause, which just where I say I reserve the right to amend my assessment should new information be brought to my attention.
If we can get to 16.3, you recommend that the accused be assessed by a psychiatrist for monitoring and treatment and planning also.
Yes, that's correct.
Your opinion as far as my is concerned, does that relate to what's in paragraph 15.18 regarding the huge tremendous media attention and spark public outcry if a deviation is justified?
No, my lord.
And then also you say in the wake of this in gender, that is 15.19, gender-based violence protesting need for a harsh sentence may be justifiable to act in general deterrence to prevent future crimes of this nature.
No, my lord. No, my lord.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, you're surprised by that. You are surprised by that. He says no. One day to elaborate.
My Lord, leave it at that.
Can you?
I'll leave it at that.
Yes. Anything else?
My Lord, I would then just request that the report be marked Exhibit K.
Okay, any objection?
Objection, ma'am.
Yes, Mr. Gold.
As a court, please, madam, just two questions.
Yes.
Ma'am, I do agree with your recommendation.
Thank you.
The only aspect that I wanted to take up with you
Yes.
is on page 3. When our the accused verbalized that he went into the first cubicle and used more drugs, but the door could not lock. Then 5.1.2, the girl came in and said she wanted to leave. I pulled her inside and my mind was very evil. I was in another state of mind. It was never my intention to hurt her. Now, at the time when you compiled this report, you were aware that the accused is convicted. And you were aware that his version, as indicated in 5.1.2, was rejected by the court. Now, him having to repeat that to you and compared it with your conclusion, rather say in page 16, the last paragraph, that he acted, yes, I agree, he acted impulsively, but now when we turn to page 17, then the accused himself says liquor and drugs did not take part, did not contribute, or he was not pushed by that to commit the offense. Now, how do you reconcile the fact that he says he's remorseful, and on the other hand, the very same version that was rejected, he still insists on saying that is how it occurred? Could that be a genuine remorse?
The accused remembers the series of events in that order, and he maintains that that is how it happened. So I believe he can still be remorseful.
And I just wanted to highlight with you that the fact that, do you agree with me that the fact that you pleaded guilty but withhold the correct version of events, that was not a genuine remorse? Do you agree?
I agree with not genuine remorse if he lied, but he maintains that that is how it happened, and
he maintains the version that was rejected.
Yes.
Nothing phenomenal, thank you.
On the remorse aspect, your opinion of remorse is not only based on the plea of guilt.
No, it's also on the empathy for the victim and the empathy for the impact of the offense.
Impact of the offense?
On people, on the victim, on her family, on his family. Yes.
Thank you, Moloka. That was
Let us read this in page 3 of your report. From 5.40.
Yes.
You are saying the accused took his fingers in her vagina and realized it was wrong. I tried to put my fingers in her mouth. I was busy trying when a mom entered. Is it what the accused told you?
That is what the accused told me.
It's not your own.
No, it's not my own words.
He didn't say to you that he put his penis inside the mouth of the child.
I quoted that I tried to put my penis in her mouth. I was busy trying when her mom entered. That is his words, my lord.
He didn't say to you that he put the penis inside the mouth of the child.
He said he tried.
Let me read for you the admission made by the accused. And you tell me what must I do now. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but I'll just highlight the most important aspect of this paragraph. In that moment, I acted impulsively and took my penis and forced it into the container. That's his own words when the judges were leveled against him. Then I convicted him of rape based on what he said here. Now he said to you that he attempted to do it. His penis into the mouth of the child. Is it an indication of remorse? Because according to you, accused has all the signs of being a remorseful person. But he goes and lies to you. You have an answer?
I don't have an answer.
And finally, you are committing life imprisonment.
That's very funny.
Why should you commit life imprisonment if, according to you, the accused showed sincereness?
I think the aggravating factors are more on a weighing scale, they are more than the mitigating factors. I don't think remorse is good enough to deviate from the minimum sentence.
You're saying, what are you saying? You say I must deviate.
No, I'm saying you should not deviate.
But what have you just said? You said that the remorse is
I highlighted
way too for me to deviate.
I highlighted the mitigating factors for consideration, but I don't think at the end of the day it's compelling enough to deviate.
Any question?
Nothing, my lord.
Nothing. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
My lord, one last question.
Let's start. We've got only 2 days for this. Let's start with that.
Yeah. Only here. My lord, the witness had to wait outside. She's not an expert witness. The investigating officer has gone to call her.
Can I point out from the photograph?
Please state your full names and surname for the record.
My name is Maureen Gericke.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
I don't.
You swear that the evidence about to give will be the truth, nothing but the truth. If so, raise up your right hand and say so help me God.
So help me God.
Yes, so help me.
Thank you. My lord, my dear witness, sit down while this
Yes,
I'm actually okay. I prefer to stand. Thank you.
You are the grandmother, maternal grandmother of the accused.
Correct.
Okay, you've had sight of the 2 reports by the psychologist, the nurse, and by the probation officer, Ms. Melvin.
That's correct.
As far as the factual background and the information regarding the family history is concerned, can you confirm that is correct?
I do confirm it's correct, yes.
You've lived with Nicholas, he's lived with you mostly since he was 8 years old.
That's correct.
You were aware of his drug abuse.
I was.
Can you give us an indication between Nicholas on drugs and or the accused on drugs or the accused sober? Is that give us an indication?
The accused on drugs and the accused sober. When Nicholas is on drugs, he's a completely different person.
I can hear you.
I
Can you please raise up your voice? I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
That thing is not going to assist you. Just raise up your voice.
Alright. When Nicholas is on drugs, he is not the child that I raised. He is not the boy that I raised him to be. When Nicholas is on drugs, he becomes delusional, he becomes aggressive, he sometimes becomes quite manic. He doesn't reason properly. He's not himself. He looks different, he speaks differently, he behaves differently. The Nicholas that is sober is a good boy. In the years that Nicholas was sober, he did well at school. He played rugby, he played cricket, he did gymnastics, he played first team cricket and rugby. He did well at school, he was liked at school, he was a good boy. When drugs entered his life, that is when Nicholas lost the plot, and that was his downfall in life.
Okay. Do you know when he became involved with drugs?
I am, yes.
Did that those of that?
Nicholas was about 12 or 13 years old, and if I can just give you a little bit of background, but you've probably heard it all. His mom was also an addict, and at a point in time, she convinced me that she was sober and that she was doing well in life. They lived in Krugersdorp at that point, so I couldn't really verify it. But Nicholas wanted to go and visit with her, and she fetched Nicholas and his friend. He wasn't allowed to mix with this particular person at that point. And she fetched Nicholas, and then she fetched the friend, and apparently they were drinking the whole night. And then the following morning, when she had to bring them home, they were too drunk, and they'd been drinking throughout the night. And that was when she gave the two boys cat to sober them up, or to put them in a state that I wouldn't notice that they were high, drunk.
How do you know that?
This was confirmed to me by both Nicholas and his friend, and when Nicholas came home, I could see immediately that he wasn't just drunk, he was out of his mind, he was manic, he was completely not Nicholas.
And how did it go with the accused after that?
I beg your pardon?
How was his behavior after that?
You mean after
That incident with his cat?
After that incident, Nicholas just seemed to fall into, he just couldn't get off drugs. It just didn't, he would try and then he would fail, and he would try and he would fail, and it just didn't work.
Was there a significant period where he was drug-free?
There was. Nicholas went to, we eventually sent him to an institution in Nelspruit called Healing Wings, and he completed an 8-month program there. And he came out I think he went in about March, and he came out towards the end of November. When he came home, he was drug free until about the September of that year. What I did was, instead of sending him back to school, I had him homeschooled and I got a tutor for him. And during that year, he was drug free up until about the September. He was drug free, and he was then my Nicholas. He was my boy.
And what happened to change that?
What happened to change that? And I believe in my heart that if this didn't happen, that Nicholas wouldn't be here today. His mum and her partner and their son had moved to Cape Town, and we were in church one evening and we got a call from her to say that they were on the streets. They were going into a shelter for adults, but they wouldn't allow my little grandson, I think he was about 4 or 5 at the time, they wouldn't allow him to go into this shelter. It was for adults only. And they wanted to put my grandson into a children's home because there was nowhere else for him to go. And I couldn't allow that. And Nicholas and his ex-fiancée and I spoke about it, and we agreed that they would have to come home. They promised me that they were drug free. They promised me that they wouldn't bring drugs into my house. That was about end of August, early of September. Nicholas, it was just before he was going to write his matric exams. And it wasn't long after they moved into my home that they were taking, the three of them were taking drugs in my daughter's bedroom.
How old was the accused at that time?
I think he was 18. I think he was 18. 17, 18. He was in matric.
Would you say that would have any effect on the offence that was committed?
Nicholas is not a paedophile. I believe that the fact that he had stopped his psychiatric medication 3 weeks before without my knowledge, the fact that he had been drinking and binging and drugging for 3 days must have had some effect on his psychological state of mind. Because Nicholas is not someone who would hurt a child. He's not someone that would harm anybody. If he, even when he was high on drugs and he became aggressive, he would harm himself, but he'd never harm anybody else. Never a child. Never.
That you would want. Was there anything else in that context?
In the context
Anything
of...
that you wanted to add on that statement that you've just made?
No, there's nothing else I want to add.
No. What did you want to convey to the parents of the little girl?
I would like so much the opportunity to talk to those parents and to tell them how sorry I am for what happened to their little girl, and that it was my child that did it to them. And I would like to say to the little girl, I am so sorry. And I know that my son is so sorry. I know that he is sorry. It doesn't matter what other people believe. It doesn't matter. I know that my son is heartbroken for that child.
And you want us to proceed?
No, I'm fine. I know that he is. I know Nicholas is a protective person. He's protected me my whole life. He was always the one that came up for the underdog in class. He was always the one that stood up for the person that was in trouble. He was always the one at school that took the blame even when he wasn't to blame. Nicholas wouldn't harm a child in his sober state of mind. I give you my word on that.
Is there anything else that you would like people to know?
Yes, I want the court to recognize that Nicholas is not just the gross rapist. There's another side to Nicholas. There's a good side. There's a side that I love. There's a side that I raised to be a good boy. But because of the first 8 years of his life, where he was abused and used, and because of the drugs that was brought into his life, and I do not for 1 minute say that Nicholas should not be punished. I do not say that he's innocent. He is guilty. I know that. But I do believe that there are mitigating circumstances and that there is another side to Nicholas that who is not the gross rapist. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. I've got no further questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, according to your evidence, there are 2 Nicholases that you know. The one, when sober, will not harm a child. And now that he has harmed a child, which this conduct, to which Nicholas will you associate it with?
Obviously the Nicholas on drugs. Let me make myself clear. I am not saying that the Nicholas on drugs would harm a child. But I am saying that the Nicholas on drugs is not Nicholas. It is not Nicholas in his sane mind.
Yes, I do understand you, ma'am, to say if he's on drugs, he's a different Nicholas. But now, my concern is, in his plea explanation, he tells this court that neither drugs nor alcohol perpetuated him to commit the offense. What do you say about that?
My Lord, with respect, I think in fairness, the question or the statement in the explanation is that he cannot rely as a grant on drugs or alcohol to avoid a conviction.
That's not the correct thing.
As a court.
He didn't say drugs influenced him. He said, despite the fact that he consumed drugs and alcohol, he could still appreciate what was happening.
As a court, please, I will rephrase. Ma'am, Nicholas says he was intentional. He knew what he was doing is wrong. Then how do you...
I would say on some level he did.
What was the answer? I couldn't hear you.
I would say on some level he did know what he was doing.
Ma'am, there is evidence before this court that you took him in and adopted him at the age of 8 years to stay with you, as you gave him support, stable home, and you showed him love. And further, that at a time when you realized that he was on drugs, you took him to different institutions so that he can get help. But ma'am, it seems that all the instances that he was for that treatment, it did not help.
He was admitted to Denmark, I think 3 times for suicide attempts. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but Denmark does nothing for addicts because Denmark itself is full of drugs. And the kids are put onto medication that dope them, and they're kept there under surveillance for 21 days, and then they're sent home. Nicholas had no real treatment at Denmark. When Nicholas went to Healing Wings, he was there for 9 months. When he came home, he was clean for almost a year. He was studying, he was working hard, he was gymming. He had a good relationship with his fiancée. We had a happy home. And I believe that Nicholas was clean. I believe that that this was the turning point in his life. I believe that. And I was so thankful for that because that's what I'd been fighting for all the years. To give him a chance at a future, a drug-free future, a chance at a life. And I believe that he would have stayed so.
I do hear you, ma'am, and I do understand that as a parent it will be painful that you're trying to get a child to get his act together, but he always relapses and go back to the same state. But now, the worry is he has been to rehabilitation centers 5 times.
You can discount the 3 times in Denmark because it means nothing. He was at Healing Wings for 9 months. My husband and I had to take a second bond on our house, and we had family members that helped us to pay for it. To keep him there was 100,000 rand, 96,000 rand for those 9 months, 8 months, 9 months. When he went to Houghton House, he was there for 2 weeks, and that's all I could afford. My husband had died by that stage, and I did not have the funds. They wanted him to stay there for 3 months. But I couldn't afford to keep him there. So he had 2 weeks at Houghton House. I'm fine. He had 2 weeks at Houghton House.
They would not keep on being emotional, and they are recording to going on. They are offering better going on. I don't know, do we proceed as a second?
No, she's too emotional.
I'm informed that her voice is not properly
It's not clear.
Yes.
Maybe we can stand the matter down.
Is it your last witness to private?
This is my last witness.
How many witnesses are you looking for?
I'm calling one.
1 witness. Can we start tomorrow at 9 o'clock?
As a copy, please.
Ma'am, we are going to adjourn.
I beg your
We are
pardon?
going to adjourn this night.
Yes, sir.
And then we'll start again tomorrow at 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
You are under one. You are What order is? These people are mistaken. And you will remain under oath. You don't have to discuss this matter with the other.
No, I won't discuss it.
Yes, tomorrow 9 o'clock tonight. Yes. Mr. Ninow, your matter is remanded until tomorrow for mitigation, evidence investigation. The state is also going to call a witness in aggravation of sentence. And after that, there will be argument and I will deliver sentence. You understand? So the matter is remanded until tomorrow, the 17th of October. We need
Benya.